My name is Sara Christoph, and I graduated in 2012. Since graduation, I started kind of finding my way in the freelance writing world, which was a little challenging at first, to say the least. And then I pretty quickly stumbled upon a job at the Brooklyn Rail, which I am at still. The Brooklyn Rail is, if you don't know, a magazine of arts and culture. And we're really well known for our art reviews, book reviews, film, and specifically our interviews with artists. So what I do there isn't necessarily hands-on writing, but it is really important to the magazine in sustaining that space for cultural dialogue and artistic growth. Our most recent issue was the poetry issue to coincide with Poetry Month. And so our guest editor, which we do every month, was Bob Holman, the great, amazing poet and musician and everything else. So that was a really incredible experience to get to work with him because he's such a force of enthusiasm. So that was really amazing. But usually my job is slightly more mundane. I do a lot of the grant writing. I do a lot of working with our board and growing the rail and trying to make sure that it is preserved into the future. Fong, who's the publisher of The Rail, was one of my professors, which is something that I think Levi did a really great job with in our program, was really getting such a variety of professors from so many different aspects of the art criticism world. And so I met Fong that way, and then I ended up interning at The Rail for a while, and then this position was created. But to answer your question more directly, I think I definitely carry a lot that I learned from the program with me, more specifically in my writing, which I try to keep up with despite working many hours a week, which I'm sure we all do. But I think, just to speak really generally, the carefulness with language and with words that is so important in this program, the history behind words, really, really just being intentional with your language is something that, even though that sounds really general, has been incredibly important to me in many of different professional pursuits. In my writing, obviously, but just in the way you approach people and the way you think about, speaking to people of all different walks of life, things like that. That's a more general aspect, but yeah. What I've tried to kind of focus my writing on recently has been photography, which when I was in the program, obviously Levi writes a lot, is known as a photography critic. And when I was in the program, I didn't necessarily pick that up right away. I didn't start writing about photography, so it's something that kind of progressed naturally for me. But I really find that photography is a way for me to talk about the cultural and deeper issues that I really want to talk about. The images, the photography, contemporary photography, photojournalism is a way for me to open up that conversation. So I have really tried to kind of hone my writing into that in order to stay a little focused. Mm-hmm. My thesis was on two war photographers that started out as photojournalists, and then after their experience abroad as being an embed in Iraq and Afghanistan, they came back and produced these bodies of work that kind of tried to speak about being a citizen in a nation at war without using explicit rhetoric of violence and bloodshed and things like that. Tim Hetherington was one and Ashley Gilbertson was the other, and they really both of their work really speaks to trying to talk about violence in an alternative way as a kind of reaction to the explicitness that we see every day and how numb we've become to all of that. So they were kind of trying to find a visual language, at least that was my interpretation, trying to find a visual language to talk about that. So both Ashley Gilbertson and Tim Hetherington were trying to find a visual language that kind of circumvented the explicit violence that we're used to seeing in images and talked about it in a different way. I felt that my class in particular, or maybe this is the case for all classes, But I felt very lucky to be in such a rich environment and people from so many different walks of life. And we really, I think the program is so small and so selected, and you bring to it what you can and take what you want, like most things. But the people that I was in the program with were really, really incredible people. And I felt very lucky to have that experience. So often I felt like I obviously learned so much from the professors, but really continued to learn from being in the classroom with the other students. So it was really, really special. And yeah, I do keep in touch with a lot of people. So yeah, it really helped to create a community, I think. Before I came to New York, I was actually living in California. I was living in Oakland and teaching art and literacy for 2 years to third graders in an incredibly challenging environment of poverty and neglect and all of those horrible, horrible things that are very real. And I actually remember the experience was formidable, and I really shaped who I am as a thinker, as a writer, as the way I think about the importance of art education and expression and creativity, not only in a youth, but throughout your life. But I have a memory of talking to Levi. Obviously, I had never spoken to him before. I had just applied to the program, and so there was this phone interview portion of it. And I remember speaking to him while I was watching my kids, because of the time difference, on the playground, and like simultaneously like yelling at kids to get down off of the monkey bars and sirens going by, and trying to speak eloquently about why I wanted to be a writer. It was completely ridiculous, but somehow the transition worked, and I felt like where I came from, the experiences that I came from over those 2 years really helped shape my position as a writer and what I could bring to the program. I studied art history and English in undergrad. So yeah, so the writing thing was kind of a natural fit. I'm thinking about applying to PhD programs, if not, probably for next year. I am still very much drawn to the community that academia offers. I think I was a little bit spoiled here because it was so great and everyone was so great. The teachers were so supportive and encouraging, and it was just all around a really great experience. And so I'm actually a little hesitant to go back to a different school environment, because I'm sure it's going to be entirely different from what it is here. This program is very much not a PhD program. But I am thinking of applying just to kind of get back into preserving a large space to think and write and study, which is really hard to do unless that's your job. I mean, I would do art history predominantly, but I think I would really be interested in doing an American studies kind of collaborative major in a way, because I am very much interested in these issues of nationalism and how that translates visually throughout the centuries, but specifically now in contemporary culture and photography and even media culture and things like that. I think I came into the program expecting it to be more didactic in a way. Thinking criticism started in 1749 or something like that. I totally picked that date out of nowhere, but I imagine it being tied to the Enlightenment in some way. So I imagined there to be history of criticism. It started here and was filled with 20 white men until 1970. And then a woman was allowed to speak. But in fact, in our history of criticism class, it started with the cave paintings. Levi really, really, truly believes that, at least in my understanding of his philosophy, that images have antecedents and they have veins that go back through the centuries, through cultures, through so many different spans and eons of time. And that's actually the job of the critic, is to look so carefully and to believe in what they say so intentionally that you are aware of all of those things. You are aware that this photograph is reminiscent of, a 18th century French revolutionary painting. I mean, there's so many connections that can be found, and that's a huge task. It's impossible to some extent, but that impossibility doesn't make it any less important, I think. And so I think that is kind of the way it shifted for me. It was less a slideshow and more of malleable, flexible, spanning the centuries kind of concept. I think my writing became, or at least I hope, it became more serious. I think I actually remember one of the first papers I turned into Levi. I don't remember what the word was in particular, but I remember him pointing to a word that I had used 3 or 4 times in this paper and being like, he asked me dead on, "Have you looked this up in the dictionary?" I was like, like this kind of being held accountable for the language that you use. And I think that level of seriousness was something that has to be learned. I mean, you have to be pushed in order, because we throw words around so easily today that very rarely are we actually held accountable for what we're trying to say. And so I think that's something that really shifted for me. It's not about filling 800 or 1,000 words and making it flowery and beautiful. It's actually much more important to be careful and intentional and be confident with what you're saying. And so that seemed to be a really important lesson. And I think that kind of touches a little bit on what we almost talked about earlier, which was the importance of criticism. I mean, I think of criticism being very much tied to the importance of language and just really being intentional. What differentiated this program for me from other academic programs was the kind of almost technical approach or trade school approach to writing that some professors carried more than others. But for example, working with Raphael Rubinstein was very much about writing as a craft. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Like, he was incredibly detailed and was not afraid to strike you down. But I think that's what you need as a writer. You need that kind of detailed attention, and you need that focus that is really hard to maintain in our digital world of blogging like crazy. But I think it is very much a craft. And I would hope that my writing has gotten better and continues to get better as I write more. Not only, I mean, writing is definitely a craft, but I also, as you were talking, started to think about the importance of editors too. I think they're so essential. The best writer still needs an editor, and I think that's something that gets really dismissed a lot today. And that's something that was so great about this program too, was not only our teachers being editors, but our fellow students. So we were constantly editing each other's work, and learning how to edit is almost equally as important as learning how to write, I think. Because learning how to edit someone else's work is really hard, because it's easy to just rewrite it and make it sound like you, but that's not editing. So that's something that really gained from this program that helped me in my current job a lot. Although an editor wouldn't use the word a lot, but I think a good editor can hear voice. They can hear a writer's intonation and are willing to preserve that first and figure out ways for the writer to become clearer, to be more direct, to say it in less words, to be more accessible. But above all else, I think the priority is to maintain the writer's voice, which is very difficult to hear when it's not yours. I think the tight-knit sense of community with people that are just as equally driven as you was really helpful for me. I think all of the things we've talked about, the treating writing as a craft, as a trade, was incredibly helpful, and it's a skill that you can use in many different professions. And I think also just the love, the passion that's here. I mean, we have Leo Steinberg's books right there. I mean, that's pretty fantastic. I mean, just learning how to live with that level of drive and passion and commitment to whatever it is that you want to write about was really, really important for me, and something I try to carry on even now that I'm not within this tight-knit community anymore.